Good afternoon. We're back in session, and to kick off our afternoon, we'll begin with the Educator Standards and Practice discussion led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair the ES&P. Joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. The first item on the agenda is going to be presented by Dr. Tomberlin, and this is the Advanced Teaching Roles item. He is going to bring us up to date on a required evaluation that has to be conducted on this initiative. So at this time, I would ask Dr. Tomberlin to come forward, and I see he's on his way. Welcome.
Good afternoon. So as a reminder to the board, this is a report that's due to the General Assembly this month. It is about the evaluation of the Advanced Teaching Roles, Teacher Compensation and Advanced Teaching Roles program in the state. Due to some timing issues with the budget last year, we were not able to get the contract in place until this year. And so what we have included here is not actual evaluation data or information, but the proposed scope of work for that evaluation. We are proposing to work with the Friday Institute on this work. And so we look forward to engaging in that work and having information in next year's report.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Hearing none, then Dr. Tomberlin, you can just stay right where you are. And the next item is ES&P number 2, and this is going to be the item on principal licensure, and this is coming back to us. As you know, this is coming back to the board for action this month. So this is another opportunity for us to take a look at we have kind of 4 buckets of recommendations that will eventually make their way over to the General Assembly. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Tomberlin, and after that, I hope that we can have a really good discussion on each one of these recommendations. So, Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So to refresh the board's memory, we have presented to you this information over the course of several months. What I have for you today is just the slides that detail the recommendations that we're asking for your approval. And I will cover those recommendations in the current statute and our recommendations for changes to that statute. So as we see here in General Statute 115C284B1, there is a requirement. One of the requirements that the State Board has to uphold is that the candidate pass the exam adopted by the State Board of Education for principal licensure. The recommendation of NCDPI is that we can discontinue the licensure exam requirement and instead include an evidence-based portfolio as part of the preparation process. Next is the internship. In the same statute, we see that candidates are required to complete a year-long internship. There's been some confusion about what this means, the definition of this. So the recommendation of NCDPI is that a year-long internship be defined as 10 months or 500 to 1,000 hours. Now that is a range, and our expectation is that we would leave it to the EPPs to decide what length is appropriate given the circumstances for their candidates. But it must fall within that range of 500 to 1,000. Work experience. The current statute indicates that a candidate for the principalship must be a classroom teacher, have a license that has been converted to a continuing professional license, and have at least 4 years of classroom teaching experience. There is another rider on that we'll cover in just a second. But on this one in particular, the recommendation of NCDPI is that we require 4 years of work experience as a licensed educator, including student support personnel such as school counselors, media coordinators, or social workers. Then the issue of the master's degree, the law does stipulate a master's degree in education administration. The recommendation of NCDPI is that we do require a master's of school administration degree or an add-on licensure program if the candidate already holds a master's in a related field. And here is a summary of those 4 decision points that we have brought you. And Dr. Oxendine, I'll turn it back over to you.
Would you go through them each one?
Sure. So the first recommendation is that we discontinue the licensure exam for principals and include an evidence-based portfolio. Number 2, define year-long internship as 10 months or the hourly equivalent of a range of 500 to 1,000 hours. Require 4 years of work experience as a licensed educator, inclusive of our school instructional support personnel such as school counselors, media coordinators, or social workers. And finally, we do require a Master's of School Administration degree from an approved program or an approved add-on licensure program if the candidate already holds a master's in a related field.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from my colleagues? We have talked about this item. I think it goes back, perhaps this first came to the state board, I would say maybe last April or May. And we have had this item brought before us several times since. We had an extension of time by the General Assembly to do a little bit more work with the item. It is a very important topic because we're talking about the individual who is leading the school. My thinking, once we heard that we did have a little bit of the extra time given to us, the extension of time by the General Assembly, I had thought that, this will be a really good opportunity to do some really deep work around the principalship, the preparation of the principalship, raising the bar a little bit higher than it is today. We have had very good discussions. We've had stakeholders that have weighed in. We've had Pepsi at the helm. We have had the Teacher Retention and Recruitment Committee weighing in. We have even heard from our deans around the state. We have heard from NCAPTE. We have probably heard, I imagine Dr. Tomberlin and the superintendent, you've probably heard from others in your emails and out in the field and in your travels. So it has been well debated and well discussed, but I think we need to take a few more minutes, a little bit more time, and go through these recommendations one more time, think about each one of them very thoroughly, and weigh in as you desire. But before we start that, I would like to turn to Allison, our attorney, if you would come forward and maybe set this up a bit for us in terms of how we got here.
I think Dr. Tomberlin has outlined it pretty well, but I'll recap what he said. About a year ago, we realized that our practices were not on the principal licensure were not aligned with the statute as well as they should have been, and that there were things that were problematic or of concern in the statute on some of these items. So we went to the General Assembly and asked for a grandfathering in of those folks that had gotten a license prior to about a year ago when this new administration came in. And then we got an extension to have this discussion. It has been it was extended to 2022, and then our legislative liaison, Jamie Falkenberry, got it extended to 2024. But we are now in a position where things like the test that is supposed to be approved by the state board is not something that's in place, and we need to have those, we need to have a decision for the General Assembly to make amendments that are necessary to bring practice into current alignment with the law. And so that's why we're up against a time crunch on that specific issue. Again, you know, we have the test, we have the issue of a year-long requirement, which is not defined, so we're inconsistent with that one, but we don't have a definition. And then the definition of classroom teacher versus a broader group that is defined as teacher in the statute as who a teacher is the statutes are inconsistent there, and our practice needs some clarification. And then the master's administration versus an add-on program. So those are the things that we need the General Assembly to permit if we're going to continue with current practices that seem to be in line with what has been done. And that's why we're up against a time crunch to make those decisions so that we can go to the General Assembly and make sure we have some clarity on those issues. Does that help a little bit?
Very good.
Okay.
Very good. Any questions or comments from my colleagues?
Thank you, Chair Oxendine. Just a comment to add on to Allison's great summary. The extension is until 2024, but that means that we need to have recommendations ready to go for this long session.
Okay, very good. Let me ask a couple of questions about and I'll start out with the portfolio. We're gonna send something over to the General Assembly. Let's say, I just don't know how this is gonna roll out, but let's say we land on the portfolio rather than an exam. How will that look? And I'll turn to Superintendent Truitt. Can you talk a bit, do you have in mind what should constitute a portfolio? Should the decision tomorrow be to do the portfolio versus the licensure exam?
Well, I think that the decision to move towards a portfolio comes from the fact that 99% of principals pass that licensure exam, and yet we know that not all principals are effective. And so we need to have a portfolio that we could perhaps look to other states to see what their portfolio system looks like, or other universities. We could see if we have any universities that are currently engaging in a portfolio. We would certainly want to have a portfolio that details the competencies we want principals to have, but that perhaps are not included in the current assessment.
Okay, and would that work begin rather soon?
It would have to, yes.
So I would imagine, let's say, maybe early '23, we would have a recommendation coming to the state board to adopt or approve a portfolio and the content of the portfolio?
It would have to be in a time frame such that when the extension expires in 2024, and I don't know what month that is in 2024. Do you know, Dr. Tomberlin?
A course towards the completion of the master's degree must be completed by August 31st, 2024.
Okay, so it would need to fit into that time frame.
Okay. What about the internship? The internship recommendation right now is 500 to 1,000 hours. Have you given any thought to anything else that needs to be a part of the internship? And where I'm going with this is, how can we really add rigor? How can we do some rigor? How can we use this opportunity, even though the clock is ticking, but take time to really give some serious thought to, is there anything else that we can do to improve the internship?
I'll speak to some of that from my group that was looking at different models from throughout the country. And you'll have to forgive me, I don't know which state it is and I don't want to misspeak, but there are examples of where districts where the participating candidate that's practicing in that district has a memorandum of understanding with the EPP of what an effective internship looks like in that district. And I think with the varied size and differences that we've got throughout this state, that might be a model worth looking into. So, you know, what does a principal internship in Greene County, where I'm from, small and rural, look like compared to Dr. Ashburn and Wake? Those are very different experiences, but if that person is going to leave that EPP prepared to practice in that district that they're doing their internship or a like one, I would think that they would need to outline, this is what we expect of a principal candidate when we're hiring in this district to look like. And that partnership would need to exist between the K-12 district and the EPP.
That's very exciting, and we could actually begin doing some of the work that came out of the Principals Advisory Committee, actually take some of those recommendations and start doing something with that body of work very soon. And also, let me ask this question, Dr. Tomberlin. I think the recommendation says something about 10 months. It's a 10-month. What about interns? Would that be a minimum? Because we do have some interns, like a minimum of 10 months. We have interns who are working in year-round schools, for instance.
So the internship is, so we're leveraging the statute and the opportunity for MSA interns to be funded with state funds. And so they are eligible, full-time MSA candidates are eligible for a 10-month paid internship. There's nothing in the legislation that indicates when that has to be. In other words, that could start, you could construct it to where the candidate is actually witnessing the close of school and the opening of school. So you could stretch it over the summer months. There's nothing that obligates the district or the EPP to put that into the regular school year. So EPPs and districts would have full flexibility to exercise that. We included the 10-month because we would be supportive of folks taking advantage of that funding, but we also recognize with the hourly equivalent, it does recognize folks who may be in other situations, part-time candidates or people who are continuing to be employed as teachers while they complete this internship, and that gives them the opportunity to fulfill that without that full 10-month day in, day out requirement.
And the 500 to the 1,000 hours, let me see if I can recall some of our discussions around that. I believe the 500 hour is the minimum. That's a floor for the part-time intern. Is that correct?
That is what we would establish as the minimum number of hours.
And the 1,000 would be the floor for the full-time. Is that correct?
I don't read the recommendation that way. I read the recommendation as the EPP would have the ability to establish an internship that was between 500 and 1,000 hours for their candidate, regardless of their situation. I mean, I think we're offering some practical ways that you could use this. In other words, 500 hours for a part-time. But we have to recognize that EPPs may have a candidate that they feel like needs more work, more hands-on experience, and they could assign a different number of hours for their internship if that's the case.
Vice Chair Duncan.
There has been a great deal of discussion, both here at the board level and obviously with other groups. These are the recommendations coming out, and obviously I'm aware there's been contentions on both sides of these various recommendations. Is there any, could you summarize what the points were that were being made by people who thought there still should be a licensure exam, for example? I've heard Dr. Ashburn, who did not have a licensure exam, say, why a portfolio system would work well. But I know there are arguments that other people would favor for licensure. It'd be interesting to hear, both sides of that. And the same with the internship and the length of the internship. Could you summarize that for the board, Tom, since you've been sort of in the middle of all these discussions?
Sure. I think the prevailing arguments on either side, one with the licensure exam, is that for 10 years we have not had a licensure exam, and we've had some pretty successful, some extraordinary examples of leadership in our schools go through that process. So would the licensure exam ensure that we're only going to get those types of leaders? And the answer to that question is no, it would not. On the other side of this, there is the idea that even though the licensure exam may not be predictive of future performance, it does send a signal that these candidates have external validation that they have learned what they should have learned in those programs, and they can one could see it as a signal to the staff that they will be working with, that they were successful in that endeavor, and they demonstrated that fundamental knowledge to hold the position. I mean, they're both great arguments. I don't know that I.
To further clarify what Dr. Tomlin is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the crosswalk that you provided to the board for the various formal groups that weighed in on these recommendations, none of the groups recommended a licensure exam.
That is correct.
All right, that's helpful. What about the internship and the length of the internship? I know there's been some discussion around that.
So the internship revolves, I think, predominantly around providing the pathway. So let me back up a minute. When you have a full-time MSA candidate that is supported in that role by the LEA, that person takes a leave of absence. They get some support to do the coursework phase, and then they get they get a stipend to do the internship period. But there are many principal candidates who are not supported by the LEA, and they seek this on their own. And this is an effort to make sure that pathway is available to those folks as well. So teachers who have a desire to enter the education administration, they may retain their position, work full-time, take courses in the evening, and then when they hit that internship period, the question becomes, do you hold them to the full 10 months, even though they're not getting the financial support that the full-time master's folks are getting, or do you allow them a modified version of that, still with the expectation that they would meet all the standards of that internship, but they may be able to complete that in an equivalent number of hours rather than stipulating they have to do it for a set amount of time.
And was there 500 to 1,000 is a pretty good range? Was there some consensus around 500 or 1,000 or some number in between that evolved from the various discussions that you could tell us about?
I would say that range reflects some slight differences. Well, I don't know if slight's the right word. Let me take the adjective out of that. Some differences in the suggested number of hours of different groups, such so our K-12 personnel, our superintendents, or our principal advisory group, or even the HR directors might have had some idea about this is, we need to have it more on the 1,000 side. And perhaps some other groups would think, less could be more if it's really intensive, and the folks are demonstrating that they've mastered those skills and competencies that are being looked for. If you can do it in 500 hours, why wouldn't you allow that? So, I think it's fair to say that the conversation about the hourly equivalent focused on the part-time MSA completers, not the full-time MSA completers. Because what's happening with your full-time MSA completers, again, they're being supported with an internship. In very many instances, they go ahead and get hired mid-year by the LEA to serve as an AP, and they continue. They accept that role, and they continue the internship relationship with their EPP while they're finishing out that first year of AP. So it's a different situation for those folks who are doing this on a part-time basis. It is not the sole focus of what they're doing in that year, most likely.
So in trying to accommodate the part-time basis, are we overcompensating? Do we need to set up a separate arrangement for part-time in some way, or if you're driving it from the part-time, does it still make sense that those are the requirements that would be sufficient? These are probably saying that poorly, but.
So that's really hard for me to say because we don't have any data on principals and their effectiveness related to the amount of time that they spent in an internship. I don't know. Even if I knew the population well enough, I'd be hesitant to speak to this without data. It's a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it. What I can say is what we can monitor from the EPPs is where their orientation to this length of internship is. If an EPP is picking 500 hours, 750, 1,000, we can capture that in our data from the EPPs. And a lot of this stuff, whatever decisions are made here, our EPP accountability model will be collecting evidence of whether this is more successful or less successful in the field. And we can look at these questions of do programs, or especially part-time programs that offer lower hour requirements for their internship, produce less effective principals. And I would go back to the number one, even whatever decision is made by the board, our orientation, our staff's orientation is going to be to measure the impact of that decision, and bring that to the board so they understand the ramifications and the consequences of the policy decisions. So, and I do want to point out one other thing in number one. An evidence-based portfolio is a requirement of EPPs in statute. So regardless of whether you use that to as the exam of record or not, that will still be happening in our EPPs.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah.
Thank you for the questions. Those were very fine questions. To the point of regarding the a little bit of the portfolio, back to the portfolio, the evidences, those 6 evidences that are part of they really constitute, in my mind, a portfolio today. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the 6 evidences grew out of about the same time the exam ended. The evidences came about in lieu of an exam. Is that the way you understand the birth of the evidences?
So the record precedes me and is a little murky. But apparently what happened was in legislation there was a requirement for the State Board of Education to review the requirements of principal preparation, and there were some aspirations for what they wanted them to do in that legislation. It sounds to me like the board followed through with that, but what happened, which is such things as part of that, the board eliminated the principal licensure exam in lieu of a portfolio, and made sure that every EPP was required to create these portfolios for their candidates. I think what happened here is the loop to change the statutes to reflect those decisions. Somehow that loop didn't get closed. So I don't think this. I think this was done in the spirit of what the General Assembly had requested, but I don't think that final loop of changing the statute to reflect the decisions of the board at that time actually occurred. But again, it preceded me. I don't have firsthand knowledge of this.
So tomorrow, board members, depending on how this particular component of the recommendation, the exam versus the portfolio, depending on how that turns out, and I'm saying, let's say that we land on the portfolio. My concern about the portfolio, and I have looked at more portfolios than you can imagine, is that if we in North Carolina say that preparation, some way to answer questions about the preparation of principals in our EPPs rest on a portfolio and not an exam, then I would hope that we would give serious consideration to some inter-rater reliability, an external team panel, and this would take some doing on the part of the EPPs. It might be an added cost. I don't know the variables. To have an outside body review those evidences, which today constitutes, in my mind, the portfolio. Otherwise, we're still going to be with this scenario. In North Carolina, and I don't want to exaggerate this, I'm trying to not do that, so please bear with me. In North Carolina, it is possible to become a principal by going through either an MSA program or the add-on certificate model, that pathway. And do all of that in one of our approved EPPs. And I know our EPPs around the state are outstanding in what they do, okay? And fill out the paperwork that's necessary. Pay a fee, I'm not sure of the fee to receive a license, and you can be a principal in North Carolina. And I really think we can do better than that. And this is no condemnation of the hard work of MSA professors and fine deans and outstanding chancellors and all of those others who support our MSA. It isn't that at all. But I just think that maybe we still have a little time left to tighten up some things. I just hope we do. Superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So I agree with your comments about validity and would just add that with 100% passage rate on that exam from 10 years ago, where's the validity? So we do need to make sure that we and that we partner with our EPPs as in whatever way is appropriate. And I think that we need to make sure that we're answering the question, where does the board's ability to influence this process and the EPP's responsibility to develop these the competencies and the details about the internship. One recommendation that's not here that we talked about a lot is which is not related to the license itself, is the wide variation in course content and requirements that we did a scan of and found incredible variation in terms of what courses were required to be a principal and what courses were not, wholly aside from linking into the number of hours, not the internship hours, but the number of credit hours required. So I think that our success here will depend upon our ability to partner our principal groups, et cetera, and experts with our EPPs in the development of those competencies.
Very good. Yes,
And
by all means.
I'll speak to, I was one of the few years that had to do both, which makes me feel old right now. But I was one of the few licensure years, and I did a portfolio in the inception years of that. And I cannot tell you a single thing that was on that licensure exam, but I can still tell you about the experiences that I wrote about in my portfolio, the lessons learned, the reflections, when I talked about those competencies. And I still talk to people about those today who do their internship under me, and some of the lessons I learned and how to translate and how do I make sure that those people learn those things. I don't think there's anybody who's going through an MSA or an add-on program that would not welcome that same level of rigor and the conversation about making that a valid and reliable portfolio program, because that's going to make them better at their job.
Oh, I agree. I think the evidences are outstanding. I enjoy going through them and reading them. The portfolio is as rich as it gets. It really is, and the lessons and the gleanings and the reflections. Thank you for weighing in on that. To the 100% pass rate, let me tell you something, Superintendent Truitt. The UNCP nursing program or any law school around the state would love to have a 100% pass rate. So I don't look at the 100% pass rate on the ISLIC, or there was another exam that followed the ISLIC. I don't look at that as that test not being valid and reliable. I look at it as, man, oh man, those EPPs did a great job preparing those MSA candidates. So, see, I'm a glass half full, I guess, on this one. Ms. White?
First of all, I really appreciate Allison Schaefer reminding us why we need to make this decision, and that is that our current practice could be better aligned with what statute requires. And so, just a floor, you know, I'm a sports fan, and you know that Clemson's a part of my family support, and Dabo Sweeney says best is the standard. And regardless of where we are on these 4 issues, I don't think there's one educator in this room that would say that it's okay for us to put unqualified professionals in leadership positions for the students all across our state. Best should be the standard. And so, while I would be supportive of keeping an exam of some sort as the floor, I think what has given me great pause is that we talk a lot with our students about proficiency and growth. We have spent an enormous amount of time focusing on our teacher licensure and what we've done to help grow teachers as professionals. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that we should be doing the same things with our principals. And so, if we can come to some sort of agreement today in what we can do to better align ourselves with statute. But I really think that we should be looking at a growth plan for our principals. And that while you might have I'm going to use an old term, initially licensed teacher, we could perhaps have an initially licensed principal. And within 3 years, that portfolio doesn't come after 10 months of an internship or 1,000 hours. That portfolio comes after 3 years of work, and there's demonstrated proficiency. And we're working in conjunction with the EPPs to say, as we walk along with these principal candidates, this is the floor of expectations that we would have as a state for what we would require our principals as leaders. You heard this morning with the cohort model with the folks in the NC Access program, we have folks practicing right now as principals who absolutely are starved for more leadership training. We should give our initially licensed principals that same training in those first 3 years so that when they hit the ground running, then they're prepared to lead. That's gonna take time to develop, and it's an enormous amount of work. What I'd say is what we need to determine is what's the minimum level of proficiency, and then what do we need to be doing as state leaders to develop those leaders. We've got a lot of groundwork to do with the students that are behind. Y'all are the professionals.
Absolutely. Mr. Ford?
One question with regard to it, and it's a philosophical question, but I'm wanting to know, what is it exactly we are expecting the exam to tell us about the principal candidate? And if it has anything to do with the quality of their proficiency as a practitioner, what is it that the exam would tell us about that a portfolio would not? Because that's the thing that keeps swirling in my head is, I think just as a culture we invest too much in tests, just period. Like, and a lot of these are, you've heard me mention before, if I have a daughter who's soon to be taking a driver's test, and I hope she'll pass. But when she passes, I'm still not going to let her drive by herself because it doesn't tell me anything about the quality of driver that she is, because that's not what that test is designed to measure. And so if we're looking to see the quality of the principal candidate, they can demonstrate that through a portfolio. We'll take the Dabo Sweeney example. If there were a football test of knowledge that a recruit could pass versus game film, I think Dabo's going to say, let me see your tape. You know what I mean? Let me see what you can do out there. And I feel like if that's the lens we're looking through, then I'm going to be biased toward a portfolio, because at the end of the day, it does demonstrate to some degree, and I think that the notion of reliability, and I think that that's valid. I think that, you got to establish some sort of standard. But I guess I'm just more about what can you do? And I think our investment culturally in exams, because that's just kind of the way we've been doing things, we got to step back and ask, what do we really want the exam to tell us? Other ways of arriving at that. Because we're expected to do that in the classroom, I'll be honest with you. Multiple measures, multiple assessments, right? And that's a cultural expectation in the classroom. Why can't that be practiced on this side of the field, so to speak? Don't know if that makes any sense.
May I respond to something Ms. White said? I think the points you raise are very important, and I want to be sure we articulate that the required urgency of this decision does not indicate that we cannot do further work for our principals, and that certainly isn't my expectation or the expectation of Pep-C in general. I think we're trying to fix a problem in a very time-limited manner, but the things that both Ms. White and Mr. Ford are suggesting are the things that we're looking to do for teachers right now, and eventually move to other educators in the building and bring that show me what you can do, that competency-based system to all of our professionals in the school. So I hope this is not seen as the kind of last will and testament of the principal preparation program, but more of a getting the ship righted so we can continue to steer it forward in the future.
I'm happy to hear you say that, because it gives me hope that we will stay the course. I know we're under pressure to to align things with the statute, and I know we're under pressure to get some recommendation or something in format to pass over to the General Assembly, but I do hope, Superintendent Truitt, that you will give serious consideration to a task force perhaps, or something like that, to continue studying the principalship in North Carolina and let this be the first step to get us someplace else. That's my dream. One other point before we bring this to closure, I want to talk about the component of the recommendation around the teaching experience and the removal that will be removed depending on how we vote tomorrow, the removal of the requirement to have 4 years in the classroom, essentially to remove the requirement of being a classroom teacher in order to earn a license to be a principal. So I have to remember, I guess it was last month, that we've probably added maybe 300 schools to the low performing list. Are we up to a little bit over 800? Is that the number? Okay, so think about this with me for a minute. We have over 800 low performing schools in North Carolina. And some of that could be an anomaly. Next year, that number could, we hope, decrease. But right now, for the time being, we have over 800. We're getting ready to possibly brought to our attention the recommendation to no longer require the principal to have classroom teaching experience in K-12. So think about that. We have added 300 plus schools to the low performing schools column. And we are also, in the same breath, discussing the possibility of removing the classroom teaching requirement from the person who is going to be the instructional leader. That's what we call that person today, the instructional leader, the principal of the school. Just think about that for just a moment. And you've heard my discussions on this matter since last spring, so it's no secret how I'm going to vote. Are we good? I mean, this is a rhetorical question. You can answer aloud, or you can just think about it. It's rhetorical. Are we okay with that? The principal is also the person who, unfortunately, has to sign documents for non-renewal of teachers. And usually non-renewal of a teacher tends to be, I would say 90% of the time, is because of poor performance in the classroom. So this individual who, depending on the way we vote, there's a possibility that we, the State Board of Education, could approve the recommendation that says you do not have to be a classroom teacher to be a principal. That individual, sadly, unfortunately, is also the individual who has to sign non-renewal documents. And think about this, in the future, we can have a principal or principals in North Carolina having never taught, no credentials, no classroom teaching experience, but making decisions about the continuation of a person's career. And one would say, well, you can always go to you can rely on the recommendations of instructional coaches or mentors, but I don't know whether a teacher mentor or an instructional coach would feel comfortable making that kind of recommendation to a principal who is the principal's never taught, has no credentials, doesn't understand the classroom. Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you for that. I think what you're highlighting is a flaw in the current teacher evaluation system. And again, this is not a criticism of principals and assistant principals, but many teachers will tell you that their principal is not an instructional leader. If they were an instructional leader, they probably would not go into administration in the first place. They have a different skill set that led them to go into administration, and many teachers feel like one of the most frustrating things about their job is having an administrator evaluate them that doesn't know pedagogy very well. Principals have a lot of other jobs. We've all seen, the charts from Best in C that show the one principal at the top with all of the, 50 direct reports. So, Patrick, how many direct reports do you have, in essence?
70 some,
Okay.
73, 74.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That is a very flawed model. And that is something that the Pathways to Excellence teacher licensure and compensation model is proposing to fix. We need to have teachers who are master teachers and instructional leaders evaluating teachers. And we need to take that off the plate of our principals. Also, what I would say is that yes, principals do decide who stays and who goes, but very few teachers lose their jobs because of teacher evaluations. In fact, I don't think, Dr. Tomlin, what's the percentage of teachers who are rated below proficient in our state on NESIS?
On any standard, about 2.5% of our teachers get some rating below proficient.
Yeah, that's a problem. Because we know that can't possibly be true. But that is the case. So we're trying to, yes, we're getting out in front of the Pathways to Excellence by not requiring those who've had traditional classroom teaching experience as opposed to those who work in the media center or who, by the way, have to do lesson planning and evaluations and that's a whole other conversation, but that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Chair Davis.
Yeah, so one, I really appreciate this. This is a very difficult topic, and we're being pulled a number of different ways. And I appreciate the candid comments from everyone. Mostly, Dr. Oxendine, I appreciate where you started this, which is selecting leaders for our schools, second only to selecting leaders in our classrooms, is the most important decision we make. And that, to Ms. White's point, this needs deeper and more thorough work in parallel with what we're doing around teacher licensure. And two, the superintendent's comments just made, it shows why licensure is the critical element for us to focus on in the system, because there's a series of other changes in the systems
That's
that
right.
need to be made. And so one thought on that is we should document what assumptions we're making about those other changes in making this decision. Because if those things don't happen, we may need to come back and revisit this, but we're hanging our step forward in this on those assumptions. For me, the first recommendation, I absolutely agree, we should discontinue the current licensure exam that we're not even using. It's not meaningful. It's not telling us anything, to Mr. Ford's comments about how well principals could perform. But I'm hung up in the culture that Mr. Ford described around having some element that provides a basic floor of competency and knowledge that sends a message to all of those who would serve with or lead a school that I've met that minimum standard. Doesn't tell me how well I'll do down the road, but there's some need for a minimum standard. Now, can we get that with this portfolio? Let me ask this, Dr. Harmon. You said that the EPPs today are requiring a portfolio, right?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Have we communicated with EPPs what we expect in terms of the elements of that portfolio that we'll rely on to judge a candidate as being worthy of leading one of our schools? Or is that work to be done?
That would be work to be done. Right now, we have the requirement for the portfolio is visited on the EPP, and those things that it should contain, as Dr. Oxendine pointed out, there are lists of things that it should contain, but in the statute, there's no connection between that portfolio and the decision to license. And so if the board were to move in that direction, then we would have another discussion about is there standardization around what that product looks like? And because if you're using it as a component of licensure, you know, quite regularly I request that we adhere to kind of standardization in the process for all candidates. So that would be a discussion that we could have later.
I see. So it sounds like on number one, at least to me, there's further exploration that would need to be done. One around the portfolio, and if the majority pursues it, some better exam than what we have now. That gets to a lot of the points Mr. Ford worked, and it could be both, or it could be either. We'll make that decision tomorrow, I guess. But the current exam's not getting the job done. But does that mean we should throw out the concept of exam? I guess that's a judgment.
That's what all of the recommendations said.
Yeah.
Can I make a quick point of clarity on a couple of things I heard? So when we don't currently have an exam, there is no state board of education. It's not like we have an exam and we're ignoring it. There is no state board approved exam for principals. And second, on the issue of teachers without principal candidates without a teaching license, that is the current practice. So it was framed as if you decide this, then we're going to start allowing that, but we have allowed that since about 2008, when this whole situation went down. We started allowing non-teaching license holders to hold the principalship. So
Okay, thanks.
just
Yeah, and when I was referring to the current exam, I was referring to whatever that one is that 99% pass.
10 years ago.
oh yeah, that was
Yeah, that one's got to go.
yeah, okay.
Out of here.
Well, to be fair to, if our testing colleagues are listening in on this, that is clearly not the same exam that is the test of record now as it was back in 2008 when this conversation was happening.
Okay. And then one last comment. So clearly there are great examples, some sitting in the room with us today, that the current system is working, is producing solid leaders for our schools, ones that we'd like more of. I dare say there's also examples that show the other side of that. And that's what we've got to address through, in sort of a triage mode to the current problem the urgent problem we're faced with, but then more to the long-term problem that Ms. White highlighted. And I appreciate your comments, Dr. Tomberlin, about committed to do that longer-term work, because, boy, our students sure need it, so thank you.
Ms. Camden, to take a quick little page from the pathways work that we're doing with teachers right now, to your point. Right now, for that proposal says, if a teacher candidate chooses to take the exam, which then that they can opt to do that. But if not, they also have these other options. It's like a menu of options. If we don't feel like the past exam was useful, and we want to try and explore some other options, perhaps down the road that would be something we could do, is add in the possibility of a more meaningful exam and let it be a choice for candidates, as we're doing with teachers, or as we are proposing to do with teachers.
Very good point. I suppose now I'm scratching my head over something I heard you, Dr. Tomberlin, if you would clarify this. Go back to the point about currently we do not require principals to have a teaching
license.
Would you
That's
talk about that
correct.
just a bit more?
So since that time, historically, any licensed, so school counselors, any instructional support person that's licensed could pursue an MSA and be licensed as a principal. It wasn't until this recent discovery that the statute clearly points to a classroom teaching license that we moved to get the waiver from the General Assembly, so that those folks who were mid-process that did not hold a teaching license could continue to pursue that principal license. And so the waiver continues to allow it until 2024, and then whatever the statute is changed to will either allow those people or not allow those people.
I have a question, Dr.
Yes.
Oxenden. Dr. Tomberlin, thank you. Did it not come out during staff working on this that we identified the percentage of principal candidates, current principal candidates who were coming out of non-traditional classrooms, and that it was a substantial enough number that the groups feared that we would lose out on too many principals if we allowed candidates, or if we disallowed non-classroom teachers?
So if we let me make sure I'm understanding this. If we disallowed instructional support folks from entering the principalship, would that substantially damage the pipeline?
Correct.
No. The answer to that question is no, that the percentage is fairly small. It's still overwhelmingly folks who have pursued a teaching career, but I think it was more of an equity issue, like do we want to shut down that possibility to folks? But the numbers are not substantial, no.
I'll also point out that we do not require local superintendents to have a teaching license
Or be a former principal.
or be a former principal.
Yeah, sorry, that's an argument to change. I mean, honestly, that's a slippery, we've lowered the standard for superintendents. Let's sure not lower it for principals.
Yeah,
I think saying that it lowers the standard is an argument in and of itself.
It is, it sure
Yeah.
is.
Well, let's hope that this is not the scenario.
Superintendents working.
That's right.
That's right. we should-
Let's hope this is not the scenario in 10 years where we have in North Carolina a preponderance of school leaders in districts. The superintendent doesn't have a background in classroom teaching, and depending on policy, we may have X number of principals without teaching experience. We don't want that situation. I don't. As a professional, as a citizen of tax, I don't. No. Okay, this has been a very good discussion. Anyone else want to weigh in? This is your last chance, because tomorrow, guess what? We are voting on it. We have a vote tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor. And again, I want to say thanks to everyone who has weighed in on this issue. Pepsi, the Teacher Recruitment Retention Committee, INCAPTI, our deans around the state, and others that I have no idea who you are and the names, but this has been a very thorough item that we have discussed over and over, but for good reasons. Thank you.
You got one more item.
I do have one more.
Yep.
I certainly do. I think it's Dr. Evans, and she's going to come before us and give us the Pepsi annual report.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to review the annual report for Pepsi for 2021-2022. And the report term is, could you go back to the last slide? One slide back, yes. The report term is September 1st, 2021 to August 31st, 2022. And this is the legislation that lets us know that the report is due on December 1st of each year. And just to give you an overview of all the components of the report, I'll be diving right into the committee membership and structure. Just a few updates on the commission. For the membership, just a reminder that Session Law 2019-122 allowed a staggered entry or alternating members for replacement purposes. This is to provide a constant with Pepsi so that there isn't any type of lull in understanding and also the work that's being done. And then the terms that are ending for the current members are one of the three following dates. And a snapshot of who has left Pepsi. Most recently was Dr. Patrick Miller. He was the chair of Pepsi. He was replaced by Dr. Scott Elliott, superintendent of Watauga County Schools. And the new chair of Pepsi is Dr. Van Dempsey, dean for Watson College of Education, UNC Wilmington. Miss Lauren Janeski, she's a teacher for Wake County Schools. She was replaced by Miss Madison Edwards, teacher for Randolph County Schools. Dr. Wesley Wood, he worked with HR for Wilkes County Schools. He was replaced by Dr. Bill Griffin, assistant superintendent of human resources for Caldwell County Schools, and Miss Eugenia Floyd. She is the 2021-2022 North Carolina Teacher of the Year, replaced by Miss Leah Carper.
Go team.
And this is a summary of the roster for Pepsi for 2022-2023. And I'll go right into meeting highlights. So we had 57 meetings scheduled for 2021-2022, and 47 of those were subcommittee meetings. And I just wanted to note that these are not the permanent subcommittees, that these are temporary subcommittees, which include the 4 subcommittees for the pathways work, which was a majority of those subcommittee meetings. And then we also had 10 monthly meetings. And I just wanted to end my presentation with providing you just a summary of the subcommittee responsibilities and priorities that you can review. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Evans. That concludes my report for this ES&P.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now move to the Government and Community Affairs discussion led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I serve as the vice chair of this committee. Mr. Wendell Hall is the chair and isn't able to be with us today. 2 items of new business. The first one is Mr. Falconberry, who's going to talk to us about the long session budget timeline.
This will hopefully be the quickest presentation I ever do. Thank you, Vice Chair Kamnitz, and to the board for allowing us this opportunity. If you just want to go to the next slide. So just want to keep the board up to date after talking with the committee chair about this over the last few weeks. Here's the timeline going forward for the upcoming long session budget process. DPI directors have until today. So directors, if you're listening, this is one of your final reminders to get everything into your deputies. And then at this point, the deputies will, if they haven't already, will go in and make their priorities and make the decisions on what gets moved forward for our chief of staff, our finance team, and government affairs team to prioritize before we bring it to the superintendent. Most of these budget requests are going to be DPI related. The bigger vision items that I know this board is very interested in, those will be made at the superintendent level with her deputies. And then, so we will present that to the superintendent in the next couple of weeks. So by the end of the week of the 17th, we will have something that myself, Alexis, and Joyce will be able to hopefully put in a nice little package, and we will share that internally with folks here at DPI, as well as at our October Government Affairs Committee meeting, which is usually the week before the state board. And then the last bullet point here is depending on how the process goes, I would assume that the state board would like a month to review, suggest more items to be added, and it would need to be voted in December. Unless the state board does want to vote on it in November, we just need to let OSBM, if you go to the next slide, we just need to let OSBM know that that the state board will most likely have the budget voted on in December, so we can let that know, because their deadline, it's a little aggressive, but it's December 2nd is what they want, and I don't think the state board meeting is until later on that week. So we will just need to let them know it will be after the December vote. And just some timelines for the board to keep in mind is that we will have to have detailed worksheets presented to OSBM by January 11th. This is where we really have to explain and kind of get in the weeds to make our case for every FTE that we would like to see at the department and through the state board, and all the nuance that goes into a budget request. But some things to keep in mind are, I know that like school support staff, and we were just over at JLOC, Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee this morning. They were talking about wanting some figures that deal with EC funding, and when Dr. Thomas was telling them, we don't get those figures until December, that we can't report them until January. There's a lot of this stuff that's going to be constantly rolling. And so just to keep that in mind, that what might be voted on at the state board or presented from DPI will have different figures later on down the road, once we collect the information that we need for school support staff and for EC funding and you name it. And finally, something else to keep in mind is, I know it's on the back of everybody's mind, is are we going into a recession? Will we have less revenue than forecast, or not forecasted, less revenue? I don't think any of us hope that we will ever have a situation like we did a little over a decade ago, where teachers were furloughed and we had to freeze teacher pay and that sort of stuff. But we have to keep that in the back of our minds with all what the experts are telling us what might be happening nationwide, is if we are coming in with big budget requests for teacher licensure or principal licensure or you name it, that we might need to kind of wait to really move forward on those until we get the budget forecast come mid-February, usually is what we see from the General Assembly, to really address those. So this is going to be a constant work in progress, but at least to get OSBM and to get the DPI and state board budget request into OSBM, we're looking at this December timeline. Any questions?
Short time.
It's pretty quick, and we'll work with them on it. And as we know from previous budgets that we've all done, is things come up and we make tweaks when we need to. And the General Assembly, we usually don't even present to them our budget requests until end of February, beginning of March. So we have some time to tweak it from there and see what pops up in the meantime.
But something has to go into OSBM.
OSBM is requiring it December 2nd. Superintendent.
So I just have a procedural question. So if the board, so that the board has to vote on the budget before, in time to deliver something to OSBM?
We're just going to ask them, like we did last year, and I think the year before too, is we just said, because of the process that we have here with DPI and the state board, that you'll get it a week later or 2 weeks later. So we're trying to fit their deadline of December 2nd, but I think the board is like the 4th. Okay. Is the state board meeting December 1st? Oh, then we might actually have it. It might not be fully packaged, I didn't realize it was Thursday's December 1st. Okay, well, there we go. So we might, well,
the 7th and
we might have something voted on, but we will need to package it. And so we might need a week or so to get it to them. But so my
I have
apologies.
on my calendar as the 1st.
On here, it's the 7th and 8th.
Okay.
So is it the 7th? Yeah, I thought it was the 7th and 8th for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, so, but then based on what you said about revenue forecasts in February, remind me, board members, if, once the board has voted on their budget, can they go back and vote again on?
Absolutely.
Okay.
of course.
Got it,
Of course.
got it.
This is really, what I laid out is the OSBM timeline.
Okay, great.
Is the OSBM timeline, and then we will continue to work together for the long session for this, with the GA as well.
Right, thank you.
So, thank you so much.
And next up, we have, as you know, we've been hearing from Dr. Molnick steadily over the last few months on this great work on promising practices, and she has another one to share with us today.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm so excited for this presentation today. First, I would like to thank you all for hanging in this afternoon. Normally we see guests in the morning, and so I'm really excited that we have guests who have come this afternoon to spend some time with us today. As Ms. Kamnitz mentioned, I'm going to talk about promising practices. We're going to focus on administrative leadership. This was our focus for the month of May. And as you know, I was out of commission in that month, and so then summer happened, and we had a little bit late of a school year. So we're now bringing this forward to you to speak about, which is perfect timing because we have two principals with us today, and it's also National Principals Month. So I'm really excited of the timing of that as well. So we have quite a few presenters from DPI who will be speaking. I'd like to introduce all of them, and they will have some time to come up here and speak and introduce their guests. You'll hear from Julie Pittman, Special Advisor to the Superintendent on Teacher Engagement, Dabari Wallace, Special Advisor to the Superintendent for Principal Engagement, Dr. Beth Metcalf, Regional Director for the Southeast, Stephanie DeShavi, Regional Director for the Northwest. And I would like to let you all know that Dr. Catherine Stickney will not be with us today. She is the Regional Director for the Northeast. Her mother went into the emergency room 2 days ago and is not doing very well health-wise. So she sends her well wishes to our presenters and wishes she could be here with us today. But just keep her in your thoughts. And then we are presenting on behalf of Dr. Robert Taylor, Dr. Andrew Smith, and Dr. Michael Marr. Okay, so each time I present on this, I remind you all how you can access the Promising Practices Clearinghouse. You can go to that link at the top of that slide, and it will take you there, or you can do a simple internet search for NCDPI Promising Practices Clearinghouse, and it will take you there. As you see to the right, our map is filling up. We started this Promising Practices Clearinghouse in January, and each month we have spotlighted certain themes and certain areas, charter schools and traditional LEAs across the state. So that map will continue to build out the rest of this year, and of course as we go into 2023 as well. As I mentioned, we're focusing on administrative leadership for today's presentation, and we will look at a principal preparation program. We will also hear from one of our superintendents across the state, and then we will hear from two principals and their journey through the principalship. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dabari Wallace, who will talk about the principal preparation program.
Good afternoon. All right, I also want to echo, we can't say it enough, happy Principals Appreciation Month. Best month out the school year. Best month out the school year. Okay, I'm going to be discussing where it all begins, and that is in the EPP. We're going to be discussing the Principal Preparation for Excellence and Equity in Rural Schools, which is better known as PPERS. This is a piece of the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program, which involves a partnership between UNC Greensboro and 12 rural districts that have been struggling to find, as rural districts do, to find and retain effective principals for high-need schools. This program started in 2016. It requires 2 years of coursework, the second year being a fully paid 11-month internship. It has mock interviews. It has a summer simulation that is a day in the life of a principal. Salary replacement, again, for that second year and internship. But the key thing, P-Peers was named the 2021 Exemplary Program Award from the University Council of Educational Administration, UCEA. The best part of this program is its approach to continuous improvement. UNCG requires the 12 participating rural districts to provide pertinent feedback about the program to facilitate ongoing revisions and design processes. And one great thing about this approach, stage one, the candidates must go through the local district, the partner district, and go through a selection, a four-stage selection process. Once they're granted, once they win or they're accepted, they go on to stage two, which is the UNC piece of the admission process. But then it gets better than that. UNCG and the 12 or the host district, the participating district, they coordinate together. And in conjunction, they collectively select the candidate that will go on to fill one of the 20 seats of the cohort. So that's just beautiful. That's just extremely innovative. And again, they are deemed a grow your own program. There's been a lot of talk about what exactly grow your own is, so here's a great illustration of it at the collegiate level. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the Southeast Regional Director, Dr. Beth Metcalf.
Thank you, Tabari. Who wants to come after Tabari Wallace? But I am grateful to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce to you one of the finest school leaders in North Carolina. April Perkins is the principal of Rocky Point Elementary School in Pender County, and she has served in that role for the last 4 years. Growing up in Hertford, North Carolina, in northeastern North Carolina, April couldn't decide whether she wanted to make nursing or education her career. But receiving the North Carolina Teaching Fellow Scholarship solved her dilemma. And for the past 19 years, she has soared to success in our profession. She was named Pender County Assistant Principal of the Year in 2018 when she held that same post at Rocky Point Elementary School, and that year she was named the school's principal. And in 2021, chosen the Pender County Schools Principal of the Year at the first eligibility. April was a North Carolina Teaching Fellow at UNCW, where she studied PE. While a classroom teacher, she was serving in a variety of teacher leadership roles and was encouraged by both of the principals that she worked for to go into administration. April applied and received the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program scholarship, and she has shared with us that this opportunity gave her much of the insight that has guided her through building a high-functioning, high-quality school. And as you might know, the last 4 years haven't been easy, particularly so, I would say, in the Southeast. So as a result of that, April's leadership was once again recognized, and she was named Topsail Magazine an Educator with Heart. April has many accomplishments that I'd love to share with you, but we just don't have the time to do that. But it's important to note that Ms. Perkins represents the incredible return on investment that North Carolina makes in recruiting and retaining excellent educators through both of her scholarship opportunities. She has worked to engage the community and students by creating a caring and successful environment in order to change outcomes for students. In fact, she increased student achievement and changed the trajectory of a low-performing school in a time of 2 hurricanes and a multi-year pandemic. April is intentional about establishing relationships and building trust. She leads through a culture of data-driven decision-making and has high expectations for herself and everyone around her. It's truly my pleasure for her to join you here today and to be introducing her. Ms. Perkins.
Good afternoon to all. I'm not sure what to say after that introduction. But I thank you for your time today, for the opportunity to share my walk through my principalship. As Dr. Metcalf has shared, the last 4 years has been anything but easy. I've had the wonderful pleasure of being the principal at Rocky Point Elementary School. My school demographics, just to tell you a little bit about us, we are composed of 44% Hispanic, 41% white, 11% black, 4% multiracial, 89% economically disadvantaged, and 25% students with disabilities. Such an important part of my story is connected to the resilience of the community I serve. I've always been a passionate educator. However, a month into my principalship, when Hurricane Florence came, my eyes were opened even more. For 29 days, students were out of school, some having to be rescued from their homes by boat, by plane. Some had to live in shelters for weeks and face unknowns they had never known, as children or adults for that matter. So my shift took from an instructional leader to helping people. I reached out to family and friends in the western part of the state, as well as all over the nation, who were very gracious in making donations for us. And working with my school family, we provided families with food, bedding, clothes, hygiene products, etc., as some families had lost everything. One of the pictures on the screen I laugh at as I was on the phone delivering beds to a family while talking to my chief officer of organization at the same time, because it was just what the work required at that time and where I wanted to be and knew I needed to be. When we returned to school, my staff was met with the additional challenge of overcoming being deemed a low-performing school from the 17-18 year data. Students and staff rose to the challenge, and in 162 school days, we exceeded growth, earned a C school status, and were in the top 20% in the state. An additional impact of our work that year led to our first Hispanic Heritage event in fall of 2019. A definite evening to remember for me, who had lived with that community through this tragedy. As the 1920 school year continued, continued visibility took place on my end, and making sure that I had coaching conversations was visible in classrooms through observations and walkthroughs, PLCs, weekly, bi-monthly MTSS grade level meetings, and using data to drive our instruction and make our decisions for our students, which sometimes also meant myself providing interventions and working with students in small groups. Might have been my favorite part. As things were continuously progressing forward, then came March 13th, 2020. My staff continued to attempt to reach and teach students virtually, but for me, I missed seeing my students in person. Much like we had done during Florence, my school family decided to reach back out to our families. So every Thursday, every homeroom teacher selected a student of the week. And on Friday morning, my counselor, my music teacher, and I drove to every student's classroom or every student's house, placed a yard sign in their yard, acknowledging them, then posting it on our social media sites. And then the following week, we would go back, collect those signs, and present them to the new families. While it was a long day, it was worth every mile and every minute. In August of 2020, 70% of our students returned in person, 30% remained virtual. Focused yet compassionate leadership was vital for our success, as our teachers were nervous going back to in-person after the pandemic, and while providing remote, virtual, and in-person learning to our students. Teachers were guided to set PDP goals on equity and data-driven instruction. Teacher leaders presented PD on Wednesdays once a month to their colleagues. And using ESSER funds, we provided tutoring for approximately 130 students after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, using certified staff members to students in kindergarten through 5th grade. My assistant principal and I, this part I don't miss, handed out meals to all students every Tuesday and Friday to ensure they had food for the days that they were not in school learning. Through experiencing a natural disaster followed by the COVID pandemic, I've continued to learn that no one cares what you know until they know that you care. And that is the driving force behind my leadership. I heavily value relationships and will always make decisions that are in the best interest of our children. As staff turnover has taken place, I take hiring new staff very seriously, and at times go to measures to giving the applicants an assessment to make me aware that they are knowledgeable of the content they are expected to teach, while that is still just one data point for me. My students deserve only the best, and it's my job to not only hire strategically, but to inspect what I expect and to give my students all the tools they need to be successful in school and in life. Circling back to the community, I'm excited to share that I've been able to hire a bilingual family liaison for the current school year and am currently planning a Hispanic Heritage Celebration with the feeder pattern middle and high schools that is to be held on October 22nd, 2022. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, April, for your sharing your story today. I don't know if that was an assessment or a portfolio that she had to go through, but I think that's a true testament of true leadership. So thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie DeShavi, and I'm the Regional Director, proudly serving the Northwest region. And I have the honor of introducing an exceptional school administrator well known across the Northwest region. Mr. James Fry grew up in McDowell County, but now resides in Catawba County with his wife and 3 children. Jamie is a 4th-year school administrator, currently serving as principal at Claremont Elementary in Catawba County Schools. Prior to this role, Jamie was a middle school assistant principal and STEM coordinator, the instructional technology and public information officer, and a high school English teacher at Newton Conover City Schools. As a growing leader, Jamie is also an emerging leader with the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development, a board member for NCASCD, a graduate of the North Carolina School Superintendent Association's Aspiring Superintendent Program, and a PhD candidate with the University of Kentucky's Educational Leadership Program. As principal of Claremont Elementary, Jamie exemplifies transformational leadership through his intentional efforts that influence and motivate, that build relationships and challenge intellectual norms to cultivate a thriving culture for teaching and learning. Jamie is a leader who understands the power of people and how to ensure equity and excellence for all, rooted in vision, mission, and purpose. We thank Jamie not only for his leadership and service to Catawba County Schools, but for joining us today to share ways in which he has developed teacher leaders that have helped to lead the way in personalized learning and building an instructional framework to ensure success for all. Mr. Jamie Fry.
Thank you so much to Stephanie for that incredible introduction. Again, I don't know how you follow up someone like that, so I'm going to do my best. It's an honor to work with her and to have gotten to know her. Good afternoon, Superintendent Truitt and esteemed members of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity to present briefly on the work of our amazing staff at Claremont Elementary School today. I'd also like to thank Deanna Finger and Ashley Arndt for coming from Catawba County to support the work that we're doing today. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with you is the importance of valuing mental health and work-life balance, especially in this role, but really any role in education right now. One of the biggest things for me was the sudden loss of my mother as a side effect of her breast cancer treatments. She was a beginning teacher in her late 40s in McDowell County Schools, graduate of Western Governors University, posthumously, and she was realizing a lifelong dream that was cut short far too soon. My own diagnosis of liver disease also came into the picture, and I realized that if I was going to continue in this profession, I had to do something to take a step back and find balance. So the principalship is really one of the hardest jobs, right? Because of the visibility, the access to community and staff and students that you have, all the direct reports that you have. You know, there are so many different directions that you're expected to be responsible for, but my hope in standing here is to encourage principals to allow themselves grace, even in the best of circumstances, and to preserve their own mental health and well-being, especially after the unpredictability that the last few years have brought us. So in school leadership, we often talk about our why and the importance of knowing our why, but not often do we actually have the conversation about why knowing our why is so important when working with people. So many of you are probably familiar with the concept known as the Golden Circle that was developed by Simon Sinek. In short, that basically says that great leaders communicate from the inside out, from the why to the how, and finally to the what. There's no mistake in that because one of the biggest reasons that any meaningful change usually requires an understanding of that why is because that is literally how you build trust and loyalty. It is in the limbic brain. That's how you build it. And if you want people to buy in and feel connected and loyal to your organization's why, that's that's the process that you have to take. So this is like Operation Polaris at the department and the North Star that's been established here. So I think that this is something important to consider as we talk about the foundation for building a culture of personalized learning next. I'd like to share a quote with you to preface the rest of my talk from Douglas Reeves. He's the author of the book Achieving Equity and Excellence. When I first observed equity and excellence schools, I noticed that they were built around collaborative teams of teachers, coaches, and administrators. We have a vocabulary for this sort of collaboration, and that's professional learning communities. This is the central organizing principle of successful schools, whatever their demographics. Professional learning communities represent the organizing principle for the entire school. It is who we are as a system, not the work of a single grade level or a department. It's not a meeting. So that brings me to the next point. This is the notion that drove the work that we did to breathe new life at Claremont Elementary School. So based on this together, I was privileged with an amazing instructional support team and assistant principal to lead our teachers and stakeholders to develop a shared mission, shared vision, and collective commitments, not just core values, to build our shared expectations for our school. So in winter and spring of 2021, we met in working groups together to develop and refine a new vision for what our school identity really looked like post-COVID, because that was my first year of the principalship, and I came in and immediately redirected from instructional leadership to taking care of people. So we used the Learning by Doing research on PLCs from Robert Dufour and the E² research on equity and excellence schools to guide the development process with teacher leadership and grade level teams. Especially after the pandemic, our school became laser focused specifically on an equity lens and how not just our students, but also our staff and community could and should be moved from equality to equity to justice. We aligned that to our district's mission and vision, and our strategic plans focus in Catawba County Schools on personalized learning. And then we took off and ran. So the original equity and excellence research was based on comparing students, teachers, leaders, and schools that all face the challenge of more than 90% of students coming from low-income families, just similar to Ms. Perkins' school. Sustaining the equity and excellence mindset requires teachers and leaders to view demographic variables as a surmountable factor on the road to high achievement. And I think that that's a barrier that a lot of our teachers and principals face because they say they can't, so we can't. Free and reduced lunch percentage at my school is 75%. It's the third most impoverished school in our district. And we are the third highest growing elementary school in our district. We just got that data not long ago. This happened, though, not by accident, not by happenstance. This happened because our staff knew the why. They believed in the vision despite the fact that they were sick, that their families were sick, that their students were there half the time sometimes. The why behind the work remained important enough to fight for the work. In terms of collective efficacy, we strongly believe at Claremont Elementary in developing teacher leadership. We have a flat leadership model with teachers leading in teams at every level, from our executive leadership team. We have impact teams. Every single one of our teachers is a voting member of an impact team that reports to our building leadership team. Everybody makes decisions at Claremont. We have 2 teachers who serve as multi-classroom leaders with partial release, one focusing on building relationships, staff, and student culture, and one who is our model for personalized learning instruction in the building. I firmly believe that with teachers, you need to build their capacity as a principal, step back, and let them do the work. In 2022-23, we've created personalized professional development to help our teachers do that. We've created a badging system and rubrics to accompany every single component of our instructional framework on a continuum from developing to progressing to mastery, so that we have clear expectations and a common language for every staff member in our building about what the end in mind exactly looks like. We also have 3 checks by our administrative and instructional support team on every single staff member on every single component to ensure mastery before we issue that credential to the teacher. This is also a PDP goal for all of our staff members. So as a culmination and realization of this work, we created a team of teachers in our building who serve as our personalized learning team. This is similar to what we did. I was involved in the work at Shuford Elementary School several years back when we began that initiative with Patrick Nelson and then with Keisha Clemens. So together, this team used research and book studies on blended and personalized learning to develop an instructional framework comprised of 3 pillars. Student-centered culture. We have a relationship task force of teachers and school employees whose sole role is to create connections with every adult and every student in the building. We've done that this year. We meet every single week with every child. Grade level collaborative teams, that's the nuts and bolts of high quality personalized learning. I don't have too much time to get into that right now, but you know what the good work is like. And data driven instruction and assessment. We have a school-wide data system that we have just created and launched this year that I'm very excited about that allows us to analyze data in real time by subgroups for every child, every teacher, and every grade level. So we're proactive as opposed to reactive to ensure equity in access for every child as opposed to just looking at it when we get the internal ready reports after it's already happened. Finally, I'd like to end with some lessons to guide leadership development for other leaders who may be interested in implementing this kind of approach in their buildings. 1, be present, be engaged, and be knowledgeable. It is up to you as the principal to be the lead learner in your building. Do not turn a blind eye to inequity. You have to choose to be bothered by it, and you have to motivate other people to be bothered by it as well. Conflict is sticky, but it's healthy. That's what the literature says, even though it never feels that way. And it is a necessary part of the growth process. We have to embrace it, otherwise we won't make change. Number 4, develop a shared, keyword shared, mission, vision, and collective commitments, not just values we espouse in word, but commitments we make in deed, centered on the pursuit of equity in learning and that professional learning community process. 5, once you develop that shared mission and vision, every single decision that you make must be driven by it. It is your responsibility. Talk about it constantly. 6, not everyone is going to be up for the journey. I stood on a table at the first time I met with my staff, told them what we were going to be doing, and told them that if this was not what they thought that they wanted their career to look like, then they could look elsewhere. And pretty much everybody stuck around, so that was good. But not everybody will be up for the journey, so be clear, be kind, but if coaching fails, be clear, be kind, and be ready to take action. Number 7, my mantra is always praise in public and always coach in private. Understand, number 8, that sometimes you'll have to change behavior before you can change people's belief. Sometimes you have to say, this is what we're going to do, and I know that you're not bought into it, but guess what? You'll see after the results come and the growth that you see, you'll do it, and that happened. So we're really excited about that. Number 9, be transparent about decision-making and empower teachers to make decisions together and communicate with leadership. And the last one, number 10, empower your people, guide them, trust them, and love them through the change, but do not give up on your shared mission for students. Thank you all very much for this opportunity.
Okay, so I'm going to present on behalf of Dr. Catherine Stickney, but I have to say thank you, James, and thank you, April. I think we can all agree just hearing their journeys, hearing their philosophies as building leaders is just inspiring for all of us in this room and listening online. And I hope that we can continue to lift up some stories of our building leaders across the state because there are lots of them out there. So thank you both so much for that. I am so excited, though, that I do have the opportunity to introduce one of who I would say is one of my favorite humans that I have ever interacted with. Dr. Matthew Cheeseman is the superintendent of Beaufort County Schools. A little bit about Dr. Cheeseman. He's being recognized for his innovative programs and opportunities he has developed for his staff to grow in their abilities and leadership. He has had a lifelong career in education, beginning as a chemistry teacher, and he's used every position that he has held as an educational opportunity to grow and formulate his philosophy in leadership development. Dr. Cheeseman leads by example, always looking to grow as a professional. This is most recently exemplified by completing his doctoral work and serving as a 2022 Superintendent of the Year finalist. He truly works to grow educators at all levels. He supports all staff to look ahead, from classrooms to school levels, and school levels to the district level. He encourages individuals in developing their leadership styles. His Superintendent's Leadership Cohort, or SLC, serves as one example of how research and implementation of best practices for school and continuous improvement intersect to provide new groups of school and district leaders each year. At the heart of this, he has a deep respect for each student as an individual and wants to ensure that each is supported by caring, compassionate, competent adults. As a proud husband and father, Dr. Cheeseman keeps a focus on work-life balance, supporting everyone to take care of themselves and each other. I'd like to now invite Dr. Cheeseman up.
What an introduction. Thank you so much. And Angie, with your experiences, what an inspiration to all of us. As I get started, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'd also like to thank the Beaufort County Schools Board of Education for allowing me to be blessed enough to be a part of their team. But also, as we talk together or as I speak to you, you'll hear my voice crack a little bit. You might see some tears of excitement. And that's just because of the passion I have around the work that we do together, not because I'm sad or in a bad mood, so please don't be nervous. When you see the picture up in front of you or behind you, you'll realize that the Philadelphia Phillies did reach the playoffs, so we're very excited about that. 11 years of losing directly. And I use this somewhat as an inspirational point to realize that you've never given up on your team, and as a superintendent, you never give up on your schools. They'll eventually turn it around if they keep playing the game and you work on the mechanics that they need and you get the right players on the team. They'll ultimately score enough runs to win enough games to be considered successful. And remember, the Phillies are the losingest team in Major League Baseball history, but they do have World Series titles. And just like a game of golf, if you make the one shot, you're coming back for the next round, right? All right, so what's the one shot at our schools? Well, let's talk about lens of leadership. And again, don't put your heads down when I tell you this, but I look through the lens of leadership around personal experience. And James, I think you and I have something in common with loss. But first of all, Mom, when she was 68, Dad, 71, died by choice. I'm purposefully pausing so you hear that. All right, at 68 years old, shortly after retirement, Mom didn't know who she was. She forgot she was a mother. She forgot she was a wife of over 40 years. Became disconnected from the work through retirement and lost her way. And while in Chicago, called me and asked me if I would be upset. What do you say? 2 years later, Dad missed her. Stepped off the Delaware Bridge. They raised 3 successful boys. I'm the youngest of 3. My oldest brother, 3-star Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy. I take a lot of leadership cues from him. My second brother, chemical engineer, leader. And I tell my oldest brother, you can have 3 stars, but if you don't have super in front of your name or title, you don't match up to me. All right? I'll take a drink of water with that one. Let's pause there. We do still wrestle in the family room. 2 50-plus-year-old men. Doesn't look right in the family room, but let me explain why I share this with you. Every single one of you in the room, including the people behind me, and I'm sorry my back is to you, you have to make a decision whether you're going to stand up out of bed every day. And sometimes the second foot down is actually harder than the first foot down, because then you do feel the pain in your knees and your hips and your back. But our teachers feel that too. So do their parents.
So do the administrators, so do the community. Everybody has their story, and that's why I wanted you to connect with mine for a moment. So I look through the lens of working to live, because Dad, 2.5 years after he retired, like I said, stepped off the bridge. He too forgot who he was. A father, a grandfather, and that one actually surprised us. Didn't have enough real true understanding being far away. So where am I from, actually, if I love the Phillies so much? I'm from New Jersey. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from California. I'm from Illinois. And I'm from the great state of North Carolina. I've been around the country a bit. I've been a teacher. I've been an assistant principal for 12 months. I've never been a principal. I've been a director of curriculum instruction. I've been a chief academic officer. And I've been a superintendent for 7 years. And no matter where I've gone, I've actually just tried to look at people eye to eye. It's good to see you. Eye to eye. And embrace them for where they are and what they want to be. So I typically ask them 3 questions. What do you professionally want to do? What would you like to professionally be? And what's your timeline? And then I work towards those goals with each individual that I encounter. So please understand, Beaufort County Schools has 14 principals, 18 assistant principals. One of them has 3 years or more experience in their current role. Let me say that again. 14 principals, 18 assistant principals. One of them has 3 or more years experience in their current role. So let's talk about growing a pipeline. So in Beaufort County Schools, we instituted the superintendent's leadership cohort. And if you could handle 5 sessions of 90 minutes with the cheese guy, then in fact, we walked you across the platform and the stage in front of the board and gave you this huge honor because we believe in you, all people internally. Beaufort County Schools right now has 12 principals who are pipeline principals right through Beaufort County, coming out of the classroom, hired by their Board of Education. 2 are not from Beaufort County. But in terms of 18 assistant principals, 14 of them are pipeline hires, 9 of which just came out of the superintendent's leadership cohort last year. And in terms of assistant principals, I only have 3 who have 2 years experience in their current role. So considering, what does that really mean? It means that we have opportunity, we have growth, we have readiness, we have people who believe in themselves to get in front of the work. So we offer a pipeline, and we offer it to every single person in the county, meaning if you'd like to be a part of the superintendent's leadership cohort, all you have to do is simply respond to the advertisement and email, and we get to be together. And then we sit down and actually write out what your personal goals are and your professional goals are, and then how we're going to be able to fit you into the model of Beaufort County Schools and what that entire puzzle looks like. It's important and it matters. So let me go back to my parents for a moment. As I said, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. So naturally growing up, I always asked my mom, what should I be? Because my oldest brothers were in school 5 years, 4 years ahead of me. What do you want me to be? And my mother, who was a 15-year-old runaway, she never said to me, be whatever you want to be. Never said that. What do you think she said? One word. Successful. Let me just let that sink in for a second. So what's awesome is I keep that in my mind because I tell my daughter, who's an 8th grader in a low-performing school, that no one in this world should make you feel unsuccessful about whatever rating they put on top of you. And that we're always going to try to be successful each and every day just through those hard-working moments. And so as my daughter jumps into the truck each and every day that I pick her up from school, yes, as a superintendent, I sit in the car rider line and I wait because in that moment I'm a parent. And when she hops in the truck, I don't ask her how school was. What do you think I ask her? Tell me about a time where you felt really proud of yourself today. Tell me about a time where you helped someone else feel proud of them, about them. Tell me about a time where you felt scared or nervous or you didn't understand. My point is, if you begin to dialogue with children, whether they're your own or someone else's, they will eventually respond to you. And as adults, we have to make sure that our kids know that there's an open opportunity of discussion. Now, as superintendent, honestly, that's part of my role. So as you look up on the screen in that growth mindset, I follow the research of Richard Elmore from Harvard University around the instructional core of students, teachers, and the content. I follow the research of Jeff Nelson and Amalia Cadero, who was a superintendent in Chula Vista, California years ago with Targeted Leadership Consultants, and they taught me about professional learning cycles, meaning how do you teach adults inside your buildings in order to teach students? Meaning, don't forget that it's all about children. And so when I look at the sheet behind you on the far right side, that poster standing, and you talk about whole school and whole community, whole child model, I often think, what's the whole adult model? Because without the adult, children would not have any opportunity inside the building. And sometimes we look at our adults and we threaten them and say, without students, we wouldn't have anything here either. Well, they're married. They go together. And so ultimately, we have to take care of our adults just as much or more as we take care of our own children. And so what do I do as a superintendent? I meet you face to face. And so in short, I come to you one question at a time, one conversation at a time. And when you're looking at core beliefs and value, I use it from an internal lens. Remember, I look through the lens specifically of change and what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like in our daily lives. Simply, I didn't ask the right questions to my mother when she was on the phone. But I've learned what questions to ask my administrators, my students, my teams. Bless you. See, here for her. Bless you. Right? But the key point is, in all sincerity, is, do we know the questions to actually ask our employees? And how do you learn about them when you can't legally ask them personal issues and questions, right? So how do you know if they're okay? And that's where I go back to, let's work to live. So as a superintendent, I don't call anybody after 7 o'clock at night. Nobody. Nobody in the district hears from me. And if your phone is ringing with my name on it, someone has been significantly hurt. Otherwise, everything else can wait until about 6 a.m. I try to take care of you. And when my assistant superintendent calls people after 7 o'clock at night, I correct his behavior. And my principals call their teachers after 7 o'clock at night, I correct their behavior. When you leave work, you have to live. And there are some people who live to work, and we need those people. But for longevity in this work, we need to make sure that there is some type of balance. And that's part of what my role is to create the balance for the people that we work with each and every day. Because not one of those people that I work with has ever sat at my kitchen table. Not one. However, I know that they go home to their families too. So I can't kick them off campus and send them home. I can just lock their door and hopefully they go home. But the key part is knowing when it's enough for them. How many of you have actually seen our professional educators work until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, show back up on Saturday just to fix their room and be back on Sunday and never have time to themselves? And then we wonder why they burn out. Ms. Floyd. All right? But here's the key part. S.W. Snowden Elementary School in Beaufort County Schools has 170 students and has over a dozen teachers, 0 of which have a 4-year college education degreed in teaching. I'll pause right there again. Snowden Elementary School has a composite score of 40.3 with 8 straight years of meeting or exceeding growth. Listen to that for a second. 8 straight years of meeting or exceeding growth. Might be 7. A composite score of 40. 0 teachers having 4 years of a college degree in education. All lateral entry teachers. So how do we work with that? One step at a time, one conversation at a time, and building that pipeline. and making sure that we have the right supports in place. And so, in the story that's on display in front of you, what I want you to know is we try to communicate with everyone across our district to the best of our ability, including the very podcast that your state superintendent enjoyed when she was there. We used our COVID ESSER relief funding to actually put in multiple podcasts in our district so our parents could stay informed, our business partners could stay informed, our community, our region, all of that. And I've actually seen other districts around us follow suit to that as well. But the key part is, in Beaufort County Schools, currently we have one vacancy for teaching, just one. So we do have community members coming in as lateral entry teachers. We do have people who want to do different things for us, which is really exciting. But when you look through my lens and recognizing my experiences, I would ask that you all pause for a moment and think about yours. And how does that influence and impact the work that you do each and every day? How do you make sure that you are well each and every day? And how do you make sure that the people that work with our kids, on behalf of our kids, and on behalf of you are well each and every day? And that is the reason why I applaud you for the work that you do, applaud you for being in attendance today. But please know, I am a very blessed person with no regrets and super excited to be a superintendent in the state of North Carolina. And so with that, I thank you for having me here today.
Well, how do we follow that? Well, thank you all, especially to the Chair and Vice Chair of the Government and Community Affairs Committee for allowing us to bring this incredible display of just some of the amazing administrative leadership promising practices to this boardroom today. As you know, my name is Julie Pittman, and I am Superintendent Truitt's Special Advisor for Teacher Engagement, and we're just really, really proud of the work that our administrators are doing across our state. So thank you all so much for being here. What we really wanted to showcase today is the different types of leadership styles and leadership supports that are happening across the state that are not only helping elevate our leaders to great success, but also allowing them to instill leadership qualities and life qualities in those to whom they're leading. Here we have seen building level administration from our two principals creating distributive leadership throughout their staff and students, while also engaging their communities in meaningful ways to elevate the culture and impact teacher effectiveness and student success. North Carolina has some great principal preparation programs like P-Peers that are not only helping to build capacity within our aspiring leaders, but also pushing those leaders into some of our high needs rural districts and schools through intentional partnerships that are addressing the unique needs of those districts and regions, thus creating equity for access to great leadership, which is so needed. It cannot go unsaid that our superintendents, our principals, our instructional and operational leaders have such demanding and stressful jobs in leading our districts. And we have superb superintendents in our districts, as you've seen a fine example of one today, modeling how we can show self-care for ourselves as leaders and understand how critically important that is so that they can create leadership opportunities through every facet of their districts. We know that leadership matters, and this has been evident through the stories that our colleagues have shared with you today. Finally, I'd like to point out how all of this came to be, and that is through our incredible regional directors. You've seen a mere glimpse today into the exceptional work that our 8 regional directors are doing for our state. Our regional directors are working within their own regions to identify where there are great practices. They're helping to support those practices to create sustainability and impact, as well as scale them up and out to create change and benefit for others. I know that our regional directors are working hard together to help share those practices with each other and with other districts not in their own regions, to support each other in the work that they do across and between their regions, And of great note for today's topic, support work in building leadership, specifically principal leadership within each other's regions. Our regional directors are on the ground every single day with district leadership as they are trying to meet the needs of their staff, students, families, and communities. Without our regional directors, our districts oftentimes would not have a first-hand conduit between what's happening in their school communities and what we're doing here at the department. So I'm happy and honored to have with us this month 2 of our regional directors who are in the room and 1 represented through Dr. Mullinex, to showcase all of this work for you. And Dr. Mullinex and I are really excited to be able to bring other regional directors before you as we continue to build out promising practices over the months ahead through our committee work with the Government and Community Affairs Committee. And I, along with my colleagues and the superintendent, have relied on these very regional directors, and I know that our Teachers of the Year are doing so as well, to help us build a stronger relationship with our districts as we seek out the work that Ms. White spoke so eloquently about last month when she said that she wanted to see examples of schools and districts who were effectively growing, who were really killing it at the game. So you asked, and I hope that we have delivered some of those examples of excellence in North Carolina Public Schools here today. There are great things that are happening with and for our students and our teachers in our classrooms, as well as our school, district, and regional leaders. There is promise that has been seen today that North Carolina certainly is the best place to live, learn, and lead. Our why, our North Star, was on display today with these leaders and their ability to demonstrate their effectiveness and to affect student and staff impact. This, and I want to also just take a point here to say that this promising practice, along with 5 other promising practices that have come before you over the last year, along with over 100 presentation breakouts and over 1,000 educators from all across our state, as well as leaders, stakeholders, and DPI staff, will be able to learn from each other and showcase the plethora of effective educational initiatives, data, and professional development at our AIM conference coming up later this month in Raleigh. I know that Dr. Petrie Martin has extended an invitation to each of you, and I hope that you will join us. So please let her know so that she can let me know so I can help facilitate your participation with us at the AIM conference. I do want to say that based on some previous conversation that happened in this room today, I would really encourage each of you to consider taking me up on this invitation. To attend the conference, to not only see the great work that's happening in our schools and districts and regions, but to also do this very important thing, and that is to engage in critical conversations with our DPI staff, our stakeholders, our principals, our teachers, our superintendents, and others who will be at the AIM conference, who are talking about lifting up and exploring these very issues that you all have brought before you each and every month. There is not another time that you could capitalize on the very important relationship building that you could do by coming to the Raleigh Convention Center at the end of this month. So with that, I would just like to thank you again for giving us time today, and am happy to address any questions that you have for our colleagues in this group.
I don't have a question. You said comments are permitted, correct? Okay.
Yes.
I just really want to stress how affirming and how edifying it is to hear from practitioners. You know, when you're over here, sometimes you feel really distant from the work. To have y'all come in and talk and share very personal experiences, each of your very different approaches, right? You know, some trauma informed, right? Some really focusing on the adults. Some really focusing on the demographics and responding to those, right? And all of them different approaches to figuring out how to equalize educational access for everybody who's a part of the ecosystem. It begins to feel more like a professional development, which is a compliment, right? Because it makes us, on this, speaking for myself, makes me feel like I'm a practitioner again, right? And so this work of curating all the promising practices, we don't get to hear about this stuff enough, if I'm being honest, like what's working. And so kudos to you all for the work that you're doing, for the leadership you're demonstrating, for the kids that you serve. From where I sit, this is like precisely the sort of thing that we love to hear. And I know we're pressed for time, so I won't ask this, but one of the things that I want to know is like the implications, right? So if you were over here or you were across the mall, right, and money was no object and politics, well, partisanship was not at play, what are the things that you would try to transpose from your learning to everybody else throughout the education field? Because those are the things that I want to know, so that these things don't remain isolated pockets, but become pervasive and part of the whole system. So thank you so much for coming and sharing, and again, kudos to you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was so lost in thought. Yeah, that's the end of my report. Here, Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll move to our final discussion of the day, business operations, and I'll turn to Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm going to point of privilege before our speakers leave the room, which I'm sure they're anxious to do, given the hour. I want to say that I learned several things in the last few minutes, and I needed to hear from the people we heard from today. You were uplifting, you were inspiring, and you make us all reflect on how important it is what we're doing in ways that are very meaningful personally and collectively. And Principal Perkins, I'm sure it's a phrase that's been used often, that no one cares what you know until they know that you care. It typifies empathy, typifies wisdom, typifies what should be in the principal portfolios. Principal Fry, your 10 guidelines of leadership in schools could just end at 10 guidelines for leadership. They were truly thoughtful, and again, should be in every portfolio. Superintendent Cheeseman, your remarks were inspirational. They were self-disclosing in ways that personalized them. And the caring, the need for communication, the notion that we need to work to live, they were concepts that just reflect leadership in all that you said, and I suspect all that you do. So thank you to all of you. This was very meaningful for everyone here today, and I think we all as a whole are so appreciative, and one of the few times I feel comfortable saying, I know I speak for the bodies. Thank you so much. So we now have a not so inspiring Business Operations Committee report as our last item, but we'll try to do one thing. We'll try to be quick. We have just a few items, and so with Wendell Hall and myself, we represent the committee, and our first item is VisOp 1. It's an action on first reading. Kevin Harrison has 2 items, and Kevin will take 1 minute on the 2 contracts and 1 minute to tell us how the gas supply costs look so far this year.
Absolutely. And so following inspirational leadership like that with a discussion of contracts is an indescribable pleasure. So we have 2 contracts. These 2 contracts are essentially for the same thing. They are for service vehicles for the servicing of the school bus fleet. One of them is for $3.4 million. The other is for $700,000. The difference, only some of them are trucks and some of them are vans. I will note that this is from the Department of Administration's State Term Contract 070A. The funds are from the State Public School Fund and not DPI operations, though we create the contracts. The vehicles are titled to the school districts, and they are for the servicing of the school bus fleet. Of note this year, the prices of the vehicles are much, much higher, some 50 to 60% higher than they were last year. We also expect a significant increase in both the price of school buses and school bus financing. Those things will come later as well, but things are getting expensive out there. So those are the contracts. On to the second note, fuel. Fuel prices are they've come down somewhat. The last 3 weeks, including this week, were $3.53, $3.48, and $3.58. So down a little bit a few weeks ago, down a little bit more, and then up again this week. So the fuel reserve that the State Board of Education sought and the General Assembly appropriated, it was built to accommodate at least $3.50 a gallon. I think that's, if used judiciously, it will certainly go further than that. And we are optimistic that pricing has moved back from that 4 and 5 we were seeing at the end of last year to this $3.50 that we had essentially built in or planned for. But there's no crystal ball, and things change at every minute. Today, OPEC announced that they would be reducing production. That will most likely have upward pressure on prices a little bit anyway over the next few weeks. We'll see how much. So we'll see. I will say that no one likes energy costs displacing other needs, me least of all. I'd absolutely rather these funds be spent on personnel all across the board than on buying more fuel, or buying not more fuel, but just buying the same fuel. But such as it is.
All right, thank you for that report. Any questions on those contracts? I didn't think there would be. They're fairly standard. But we will keep the board posted on a monthly basis or so as we go through the year in terms of where we are with the gas pricing, just so that we know where we are in terms of the reserve. And I appreciate your keeping a close eye on it, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you made this presentation last year. Perhaps you did. If not, you can probably help me figure out who did. There was a discussion about a pilot on electric buses.
Mm-hmm. That was most likely me.
Yeah.
We have 5 on order.
Can you, at some point, maybe it's certainly not today, but in the future, if we could get an update on anything that you're learning from that?
Certainly, we do not presently have the vehicles yet, so we haven't learned anything. But they are on order.
Well, that's a good update.
It takes a long time, and the supply chain has been pretty bad, which is part of the reason why all the prices are going up as well. So those electric vehicles have been on order since January or so of last year, but we don't have them yet.
Okay, well, that's an update. Thank
Yep.
you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Townsend, as our last contract in excess of $500,000, which is the University of North Carolina Greensboro Serve Center, having to do with our homes program, our foster program, and our immigrant program dollars. And I think I covered most of it. Dr.
Yes, so this is a task order with the University of North Carolina at Greensboro Serve Center, and this is a longstanding relationship that we've had. It initially just started to serve our homeless students that are served under the McKinney-Vento Act, and then it was expanded to include support for foster students, and then 2 years ago, we began using the contract to have additional support for 21st Century, the Migrant Education Program, and the Migrant Education Program. And so this allows us to be able to support these programs that are in the Consolidated Portfolio, or ESSA.
Thank you. Any questions on this important contract? All right, not seeing any. Thank you for your work, Dr. Townsend. We now move to BizOp 2, the North Carolina Access Sub-Grant Program application recommendation. In this interest, Mr. Whalen indicated he would be back, and this is why. It's specifically this is for Movement School Southwest, and I think we can sort of, since we've spent a lot of time on NC Access this morning, we can focus very directly, if you will, on time.
Yep.
Give it time on the specific application.
Yep, absolutely. And as a follow-up, I did bring those guidebooks from the fellowship, so I will leave those for anyone who wants it. So we held our 4th competitive application cycle earlier this summer. There were 3 eligible schools at the beginning of that process. Movement Southwest was the only school to fully make it through the process. So we evaluated their application. We used a trained group of external evaluators for that. And based on their evaluations using the state board approved rubric, our office and the Charter School Advisory Board is recommending approval of an implementation only award for Movement Southwest of $400,000. They, over the course of the 5 years in the program, they will have about 640 students, more beyond that 5 years when they're fully grown, with a projected EDS enrollment of 60% and likely more than that. They do have significant plans for transportation. They will join the National School Lunch Program, and they have a pretty robust marketing and recruitment strategy for translating documents, hiring bilingual community liaisons, and other specifically targeted strategies for educationally disadvantaged students. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that the board has. You have the full recommendation.
And it's very full, so yes, we do. Thank you. Any questions or comments on this grant? This is, it's exciting to have over the number we forecast grant, so that's a very good part of it, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, BizOp 3. This is a policy amendment that follows up our action last month with respect to principal retention supplements, the allotment policy with respect to those supplements, and Jennifer Bennett is here to quickly advise us as to the changes necessary.
Very quickly, this is, good afternoon, everybody. Jennifer Bennett, Senior Director of School Business. This is the allotment policy to follow up the action that you took last month on the ESSER 3 funds to reallocate $4.5 million of that towards a retention supplement for the principals that may be impacted by the growth EVAS data come January due to the 1 year action in their principal salary schedule. It is a retention supplement, so I want that to be clear. It's a supplement. As such, it's subject to teasers, meaning retirement. It is a grant program since it is being funded from ESSER, so there will be an application process. We expect that to work through CCIP towards the end of the month, and we will get instructions out to the LEAs accordingly. The principals must be employed as of January 1st, 2023 to be part of this program, and it is non-transferable since it is a retention supplement, meaning that if they leave the district, this money does not move with them, or if they take a job that is not a principal within the district, this money does not move with them. It is a principal retention supplement, which is how you approve those funds. And this is simply the policy for us to enact that as approved last month.
Any questions or comments on this item? Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Item 4 is a consent item. It is an annual report to the General Assembly on cooperative purchasing agreements. Dr. Sandberg's here if there are any questions about it. Actually, Mike Ramsey, if there's any questions about it. The one item that's of interest is that we were asked as part of the report to set out the amount of the savings by the cooperative contracts. That's an easy thing to say. It's not really possible to do very effectively. So there is ongoing efforts to be in a position, using some ongoing research to try to come up with improvements in that report to try to get at some approach that would provide some additional information. But we are advising the General Assembly of that as opposed to pretending that we have a handle on that, because you can't really get a handle on that very easily. So we're looking at some ways to try to do it. So any questions or comments on that from Mr. Ramsey? All right, not having any, your work here is done.
Thank you, sir.
Our next item is updates on contracts. We had executed and planned contract reports. Not heard any questions on those, but if there are, please raise them and we'll make sure we can respond. All right, not hearing any, we'll go to finally the monthly budget report. Are there any questions on the monthly budget report? Because Alexis is here to respond to those if there are any. All right, not seeing any then, to conclude our report, we would ask you to approve the contracts in BizOp 1. To ask you to approve the sub-grant for the NC Access Program in BizOp 2. Approve the policy amendment in BizOp 3 for principal retention supplements. And finally, to approve submission of the report to the NC General Assembly on the cooperative purchasing agreement for BizOp 4. Thank you for your time.
That was record time, Vice Chair Duncan.
Well-
And let the record reflect.
If the Biz Op committee feels good, this is the third month in a row we've gone when we started after the time we were supposed to finish.
Duly noted. Duly noted. Well, this does conclude our discussions for today. We'll now move into closed session. And when we do, I'll let, for those listening, as soon as we conclude closed session today, then our work today will cease. We will reconvene tomorrow, October 6th at 9 a.m. Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11A1, 3, and 6, to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Sections 115C-319 and 321, and 120-129 et sec. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees, or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: M.W. versus CMS et al., Johnson versus DPI, Elliott versus DPI, Reeves versus Williamson et al., OM versus Innovative School District, and the State Board of Education versus Minnick.
Motion's on the floor. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Blackburn. Any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan. Yes. Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Mr. Ford. Treasurer Falwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
And Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Let's be in closed session at 4 p.m.
It was outstanding.
We got a door and bring it back. Specific about something more to Nice job. All right, I'll be right in there.
Yeah, it was amazing. So, and so we were part of the in 2018. Obviously, it should have happened in 2018. You know what? Just because. Vienna, Salzburg, Bratislava.
That's like
Give me I'll be all right.
That's one too many. Should have just stopped.
Yeah, something happened up there saying, my Lord, you don't know.
What had happened.
Basic knowledge of football, how well they execute their passing, their throwing, their lateral moves, and their cuts. That's a whole different story, but you do have to have a floor.
He did. Down that way. That should be easy.
I would have been really,
But
really
any
happy.
witnesses on it all?
They're working on it. Let's have a better opportunity to move forward, you know, what is it?
The other woman was in the car, got in the car. I can't pull the pump. She's like, you can't do it. Not a chance.
If you, yeah, oh, that's true, that's true, you did, yeah, exactly. She doesn't have
The only thing she said, I thought was leaving. Yeah. But it was sort of interesting. DA was arguing. On accident. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, man. Thank you.
All right, guys.
I gotta head back home into Asheville.
Oh, okay, be safe.
I gotta take care of yourself. Stay out that cycle boom.
You saw my email.
This is going upward today. This one just was here.
James, I wish I had your eloquence.
With regard to what?
Huh?
With regard to what?
What you just said at the very end there, to the speakers.
What, no, I meant that. I mean,
I know you mean it. I didn't mean it. It's not,
I'm sorry.
just real eloquence.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I was fumbling for words, but I was just fumbling right there. You know? I miss being that close. It's great having little shows between the
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just, it is.
This is mine.
It gives us purpose.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, it reminds us of our purpose.
That's right. While we're here. We're here to
Yes.
All right. See you.
Let's get you one, safe travels. I should have a new one, but
You saw it. That's called that light. Don't let it blind you. Now put your glasses back on. Oh, you can't touch. You can't touch. You can't touch.
Now watch this. Now see, you can't touch it. So you know
Jason Caldwell, yeah.
So Jason Caldwell is one of the guys. So he's the one who keeps saying, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King would be so proud of you. Oh Lord, here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Here we go, here we go. But I will say this, a little bit, so I can't keep up with y'all.